Hello there, very good evening to you. You're watching the press preview. A first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive for you tomorrow morning. So let's start. Well, time to see what's making the headlines with the columnist Carole Malone, the political editor as well of the Liverpool Echo, Liam Thorp, join us tonight. They're going to be with us all the way to midnight this evening. So let's start by finding out what's on some of those front pages. And we'll start with the Daily Mail. It says, despite growing NHS waiting lists, the Mail reports that GPs are demanding that in future they work just 9 to 5. The Eye tomorrow says there's likely to be conflict in the Cabinet over plans to withhold visas from foreign students pursuing what are described as low-quality degrees in an effort to reduce net migration. That's also the lead in The Times tomorrow. Now, The Telegraph says that Boris Johnson and Liz Truss are planning to challenge the authority of new PM Rishi Sunak by demanding an end to the ban on new wind farms. According to the Financial Times tomorrow, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has insisted Russia's attack on its power grid and infrastructure will not ultimately succeed. The Guardian says MPs want an investigation into claims against Tory peer Baroness Mone about payments that she allegedly received from her ties to a PPE manufacturer during the pandemic. There are allegations that she has denied. The Sun reports that David Walliams is to leave his judging role on Britain's Got Talent. It comes after off-air footage emerged showing him making derogatory sexual remarks about a contestant. The Metro predicts that 30 million pints of beer will be drunk during England's World Cup match against the United States tomorrow, while the Star believes that many people will use it as an excuse to take the day off work. Heavens not. A quick reminder as well for you that by scanning the QR code on the screen that you'll see during the course of the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers while you watch with us. So do give that one a go. And as I say, we're joined tonight by Carole Malone and Liam Thorp. Welcome to you both. Thank you so much for joining us so late on a Thursday evening. Let's have a look at what's caught your eye. Carole, let's start with you. The front page of The Telegraph. This is big news, isn't it? The nurses striking. The first national strike by nurses. What more can you tell us?
Yeah, I mean, they've said they're going to go on strike for 2 days. I mean, this really... Yeah, I fear for what's going to happen if they do stage this strike. I think it's a Rubicon that if they cross, people will perhaps never see them in the same way ever again. You know, I think if they strike, the whole ethos of what nurses stand for will be sullied. Now, I know that a lot of them are complaining that their pay is low. I mean, they start on 27 grand. When you're senior, it goes up to 55 grand a year. And a lot of the agency nurses are actually not doing too badly. They're on 68 grand a year. But the bottom line is I just think, you know, this is different. This is if a nurse walks out, lives could be lost. If the posties go on strike, your letters and parcels don't get delivered. If the RMT goes on strike, you know, you don't get a train. This is entirely different. And it's the first strike in their history. And I really, really don't want them to do it. Am I saying that I think nurses should be better people than all the rest of them? Yes, I suppose I am. Because I think we've all grown up with the idea that nursing is a vocation, and if they go on strike, it would feel like it's not a vocation because they're walking out on people who need to be cared for. There's a very interesting piece written by a nurse the other week, and I just want to read you what she said. She says she's not going to go on strike, and she said, you know, what strike action really means. She says, I'm talking about the hands not held, the small compassionate gestures not done, or the words of comfort not spoken to grieving relatives. Now, that to me sums up everything a nurse is about. And if they walk on strike, that's not going to happen. And I fear for their reputation if they do it.
Liam, let's bring you in now. The Daily Telegraph goes on to say that the RCN says it's calling this strike after the UK government turned down its offer of formal negotiations or detailed negotiations. They said they basically got no other option now. Where do your readers sit on this? Where do you sit on this?
Yeah, I would be fairly confident I'm pretty in line with the thoughts of my readers, which is to 100% back these striking nurses. You know, I wholeheartedly disagree with what Carole just said. And I think the whole point of stressing just how absolutely vital someone is to our society, to the health of our people, is that it's the point. That's proving the point that they should be paid correctly. These people will not be taking this action lightly. You don't go into nursing to go on strike, of course. You don't go into nursing to be operating in the critical situation that they are at the moment. I've spoken to several nurses who are going on strike, and the situation that they explained to me is really bleak. There's nurses using food banks being set up in hospitals so that nurses can get by. There's people, they're completely overworked, they're stressed.
That story about the food banks goes around a lot. And I don't know whether you've been looking at social media recently. There's a lot of nurses going on social media saying that, the money they get means they're not using food banks. They're on between 30 and 40 grand a year.
Okay, but I literally spoke to a nurse on the phone who was being forced to use a food bank.
But there's lots of.
I spoke to more than one, actually. I spoke to more than one, and they're not making it up.
Now there are the ones on social media.
Let Liam finish. Liam, come back in. Carole, let Liam have more time, please.
So yeah, perhaps some aren't using food banks, but the fact that any nurses who are working full time in this country, in this rich economy that we live in the National Health Service, are being forced to use food banks, or even contemplate using food banks whilst working, their backsides off to try and keep us safe, as they did throughout the pandemic, by the way. Let's not forget the absolute heroism that they did through the pandemic. And now they want to be able to live like the rest of us. They're struggling. They want to be able to pay their bills. They want to be able to feed their families. And they will not have taken this action lightly. Yes, there are going to be safeguards in place around urgent care and critical care, but they know that this action is going to have consequences. The NHS is already on its knees, and they know that postponing more appointments and operations and surgeries and things like that is going to be a big problem. So they're not taking it lightly, just like everyone else in every other sector is not taking it lightly. If you believe our nurses are absolutely vital, then pay them properly.
Okay, quick word from you, Carole, let's move on.
It's absolutely true. The compassion and the goodwill of nurses has been exploited by successive governments. However, I don't believe it is the right thing to do to walk out on sick people. You've just said there, safeguards will be in place, but there will be consequences. Would you be so carefree about talking about those consequences, Liam, if it was someone in your family who suffered those consequences? Because I wouldn't. And I just think if you go into nursing, you should not be able to turn your back on sick people.
Okay, I tell you what, I'm going to jump in because we want to have a look at what else is going on in the papers. It is a massive story, and it's going to dominate, I'm sure, the news tomorrow. But Carole, it's not just nurses, is it? Look at the front page of The Guardian, and we saw what was happening in Scotland today. You've got teachers striking, postal workers striking, railway workers striking, and not just school staff as well as teachers and lecturers. I mean, are we heading for a winter of discontent in this country, according to The Guardian?
It's kind of looking like we are, and it's, it kind of...
So do you disagree with everyone striking, or is it just nurses?
No, I don't.
Yeah, are they all?
Liam, let Carole finish.
Let me finish. I don't necessarily disagree with postmen striking because I think their salaries are a lot lower than a lot of the RMT workers.
And nurses?
I think it's a shame that the teachers in Scotland are going on strike. Kids have missed so much school in the last 2.5 years, and to go out on strike is actually not helping. I think, a lot of the amount that the people are asking for, a lot of the raises, they're asking for inflation-busting pay rises. That is not going to happen. That can't happen. And if it does happen, inflation is going to be with us for years to come. Inflation will not go down if that happens. Some of the demands are unrealistic. And I just, I think the RMT's demands are unrealistic. They're asking for between 7% and 8%. It's not going to happen, And
why is that not going to happen?
Sorry?
Why is 8%?
Broke. Look at what's happening to ordinary people every day now. We're being taxed to hell and back. Well, there's been stuff put on us that we don't know how we're going to manage. How are the government, if they're doing that to us, how are they going to be able to pay all these inflation-busting pay rises? They literally can't. Unless
First of all, 7 or 8% isn't inflation busting. It's considerably below where inflation is running at the moment.
Yes,
and the alternative
is still unrealistic.
The alternative to this is that people are becoming destitute. People who are working hard are becoming destitute. There is more money in these networks, as the RMT have pointed out. There is more money in the train system, in the train service, and actually, for the first time in a while, we've had a transport secretary who's actually sat down with the RMT and is talking about moving towards a deal. The government has just not wanted to engage with the unions at all up until this point. They obviously want to, Rishi Sunak mentions it every time at PMQs, tries to hold up this idea of union barons. But what you have to always remember is behind the union leader are successful votes from members. These are everyday workers, whether it's nurses, posties, train drivers, RMT staff. And
What is the percentage?
they're all voting.
You will know this. What is the percentage in the RMT that has to vote for strike action? It is not the entire workforce. What is the percentage? But 40%?
It has to. But it has to be. It has to pass a certain threshold. Those are the rules.
Yeah.
Okay. And in all of these cases,
I'm going to jump in again because I want to have a look at one final paper before we go to the break, and that's onto the Daily Mail. GPs voting to shut doors at just 5 p.m. Liam, what's all this about?
Yeah, I mean, so this one has just come through from the Mail this evening, and it isn't going to help the situation with the NHS. We know that obviously people are who currently are struggling to get GP appointments are ending up in hospital, in A&E. I've done quite a lot of reporting recently from completely overcrowded A&E departments. Now, many people are requiring emergency services. Some people are not, and they simply can't get a GP appointment. I don't know if anyone else around here has tried to get a GP appointment recently. It's nigh on impossible. This story in the Mail is saying that GPs voted last night to limit their hours to opening between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m., saying that longer working days will discriminate against their families. I don't know the full details of it, but obviously it's going to have a knock-on effect to that kind of primary care situation with hospitals. What we don't need, obviously, is more people who perhaps don't need to turning up at A&E, and which is already massively overcrowded.
Carole, you're shaking your head. We're going to get your response in just a minute because we've got to go to a break.
Okay.
But you just stay still and we'll come straight back to you after that. Thanks so much for that. Well, as net migration increases again, we're going to ask whether the government has the right idea about how to deal with it. Do stay with us here on Sky News. Hi there, welcome back. You're watching the press preview. With us now is Carole Malone and Liam Thorp. Welcome back to both of you. Carole, let's just come back to you regarding the front page of the Daily Mail. I know you've got a point you want to make regarding this headline that says GPs vote to shut doors at just 5 p.m. GPs voting last night to limit their hours to 9 o'clock to 5 p.m, claiming that longer working days discriminate against those with families. What point would you like to make on that?
It astonishes me, if you want to work 9 to 5, don't go into medicine. I would imagine most GPs have families, have kids. They knew exactly what they were going into when they started medicine. It is not a 9 to 5 job. And I suggest the people who think it should be are possibly in the wrong job. And the reason we seem to have a shortage of GPs is because 60% of them only work 3 days a week. I find that astonishing. Most of them are, I think the average salary is something like 119 grand a year. Presumably they're still getting that if they're working 3 days a week, and if not, they're getting something close to it. So, it's not that we don't have enough GPs, it's the one we have are choosing not to work 5 days a week. And some stats came out yesterday that said 44% of all appointments at doctor surgeries are not with GPs. They're with nurses and health physicians and physios. So why aren't the doctors seeing people face-to-face? Why in the worst performing surgeries are just 12% of patients being seen face-to-face? It's disgraceful. They were saying 80% of people face-to-face before COVID. What's happened since then? We haven't lost GPs. We've actually gained GPs by 1.5%.
Let's move on. We've got lots of papers to get through. Thank you, though, Carole. On to the eye. And, of course, on the day that we had the news that net migration has reached an all-time record of 504,000 a year, despite, of course, government pledges to crack down on arrivals. Liam, we hear that there's going to be a student visa crackdown, which is set to spark a major cabinet row. What do you make of this?
Yeah, it looks like Rishi Sunak's got a few potential rows on his horizon. I think we may talk about another one later. Yeah, just a few in his in-tray. This is, it's particularly relevant, as you say, with that news about that record net migration today. And an enormous portion of that number was students, overseas students. We know that obviously post-pandemic as well, we've seen a rise in people coming over to study. And part of the UK's sort of selling point is a huge selling point is that students want to come here and get a good education. So it's a difficult one at the moment as well for the government, because obviously there is a real issue in terms of labour shortages, in terms of the effect that, dare I say it, that Brexit is having on the economy in terms of people coming in and working here in different types of jobs. Yes, there might be record migration, but there's not necessarily people coming into all the types of jobs that are required. If you look at, say, hospitality, areas like that, where the free movement of the European Union meant that lots of people were coming in to work in those industries, and we currently can't get the people to come in and work in those areas. you may often have got people who are coming in who were students who would pick up jobs in the hospitality area as well. So what the story in the Eye is saying is that the Treasury is worried that if there is a cap on student visas, that's going to harm the economy. We know that Suella Braverman is under pressure to bring these numbers down. She obviously thinks one way to do that is kind of, she's determined to act on student visas. I'm not necessarily sure that that's going to work, because the government need people to be coming into the country and contributing to the economy right now. So it's a real headache for the government. And against the backdrop of that large figure, they seem to be going after students. I'm not sure that's what everyone in the cabinet is going to agree on.
Well, I think a lot of universities need foreign students to come over in terms of paying these much higher tuition fees. I mean, what do you think about this, Carole? Are we set up for a serious rift in government, according to Suella Braverman?
Well, I think what Suella Braverman is talking about is students coming to do what she calls low-quality degrees. And so that's what she wants to put an end to. I mean, something like 485,000, there were 485,000 sponsored visas last year. There's been an increase of 71% in student visas since 2019. I mean, that's a huge amount. And the argument is a lot of the students who come are bringing dependents, and then the dependents bring more members of the family. And so it isn't just the students, it's all their immediate family as well, and they stay. So I think that's what they're looking at today. You know, the migration figures we have, you know, Sunak was saying today that a lot of those were to do with a lot of the Afghans and Ukrainians that came here in the last 12 months. And it is absolutely right and proper that we take care of those people. They really are genuine refugees, and we have to take care of those. That's not illegal. That's exactly what Britain should be doing, looking after the people who are fleeing war and terror. So yes, there is an upsurge this year, but on stuff like the student visas, which seems to be like out of control. I think more than half of the student visas are granted to the Indians and the Chinese. They took up most of them. So that's one thing they can actually do something about. They have some control over that. So maybe that's why they're looking to that area.
And just very briefly, if you don't mind, Liam, Daily Telegraph says it's going to be putting on the government pressure to get net migration down to 100,000 a year. Is it possible, do you think? Very briefly, Liam?
I think that was what David Cameron was saying, wasn't it, quite a few years ago? I think, you know, Carole makes a good point. These are extraordinary figures. They are, you know, it is a sort of unique circumstance with both the Ukraine situation, Afghanistan and Hong Kong. All of that come together with a post-pandemic balance.
All right,
you know,
Liam,
we will
for
see
now,
that number
thank you,
down.
Carole. We'll get more from you at the top of the hour. You're watching Sky News at 10. See you in just a few minutes' time. More from the papers.